A reading from Luke, which is slightly shorter than the version in your service sheets. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide their family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God." He said to his disciples, "Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest?" This is the word of the Lord.
Hey everyone. Oh, sorry. I just want to tell you a story. There go my notes. About the first time I ever came to St Albans. It was about 8 years ago, and I was working in London in advertising at the time, and I was working on the Morrisons account. And there was a new CEO who wanted to change the way everybody felt about Morrisons. So they'd planned a new concept store of the future. And the place they'd chosen to trial that new store was Hatfield Road, St Albans. So there was dry ice wafting over the fresh herbs, samphire, asparagus, and umpteen different kinds of hummus, all made fresh on the premises. And the PR agency organised a big trip. So all the press people from London were to be kind of shipped up to St Albans to admire the new store and to tell everybody that Morrisons had changed. Well, it backfired a bit horribly. The journalist from The Sun took loads of photos, said all the right things, and then got on the train to Bolton, Morrisons' heartland, and showed a load of people from Bolton, Morrisons' heartland consumers, pictures of this new store in St Albans. And there were just a series. The headline was a picture of a man from Bolton in a shopping centre, and the headline was, "I never will and never have required lemongrass." And that was the end of that. And if you've been to Morrisons in Hatfield Road recently, you'll know the dry ice is gone. You would struggle to buy samphire on Hatfield Road these days. The point is, people are not as easily influenced as some advertisers and critics of advertising make out. We all know it's within our power to know who we are, to choose how we respond, to learn how to respond, to think critically and prayerfully about the messages we see, to call them out when they're offensive and wrong, and to encourage our children to do the same. Well, in the passage we had today, we see Jesus encouraging us to do that kind of thinking and weighing and considering. He doesn't just tell us what to think. I don't know if anyone's seen, there used to be a program on US TV called Judge Judy. And it would be this sort of high court judge, and she'd sit in a TV studio, and people would come along with issues in their own lives that they would want Judge Judy to give a judgment or a ruling on. So they'd come in and say, my sister borrowed my car and she dented it and I wanted to pay for it. And Judge Judy would get involved and say, yes, that should happen. And it's clear that the man in the passage seems to think that Jesus is some kind of Judge Judy character. He wants Jesus to tell his brother to share his inheritance with him. And maybe he's right, maybe he isn't. We're not told. But Jesus refuses to get involved. He refuses to make that judgment. And instead, perhaps frustratingly, if you're the man who just wants Jesus to tell his brother what to do, Jesus responds with a story, a parable. And as we all know, the frustrating thing about parables is that they aren't always clear cut. There isn't always an obvious good person and an obvious bad person. They're ambiguous. Sometimes Jesus explains what he means by them, but often he doesn't. He forces us to think things through ourselves. At the moment, in our Plenty sermon series, we are thinking about the environment, about consumerism and greed, and the way we live with our stuff. So I've got a few thoughts today, but the most important thing is to realise that Jesus invites us all to weigh this stuff ourselves, to think it through ourselves, and come to it with an open mind and share the insights that only we can individually bring to everybody else. That's what home groups are for at St. Peter's, and that is also what we're aiming to do every Thursday at the Plenty course at 8 o'clock in the Octagon and on Zoom. It's not too late to sign up, stpeterschurch.uk.com/plenty. Please come and join us. We had a great time on Thursday. So, advert over. But what Jesus does do in the passage is give us a principle which is clear and which he'd like us to explore. And the principle is that greed is a bad thing. Be on your guard, he says, against all kinds of greed. So the rest of this talk today, we're going to explore what greed looks like in this passage and what it does to us. Remember what the parable is about. There's a successful man with considerable wealth who takes steps to look after it and safeguard it so his future will be safe. So he builds bigger and bigger barns to keep all of the stuff he's acquired. Now, on one level, you could argue, well, he's just acting responsibly, isn't he? Legally, it's his stuff. He has allowed it to grow. It's his land. He's acted smartly and responsibly. He's stewarded his resources well. But if you look at the way Jesus puts it, there's a little clue there. He says, it is the land of a rich man produced abundantly. It is the land that produced. Nature, the weather, the sun, the rain. If you remember the parable of the growing seed in Mark 4, we see that Jesus believes that natural growth happens without the say-so or involvement of the farmer. So the point, I guess, is that we need to consider to what extent the wealth we have is completely ours anyway. Isn't it often the case that the nature of wealth, that it's partly our own doing, but it's also partly an accident of inheritance, birth, the opportunities we've had? I guess for all of us, there's a combination, isn't there? We've worked hard for things that we have, but we've also potentially had a leg up or not, according to our family, our social class, our gender, the education we had. God has created a universe and a planet that can give life to all of us. And the central thought behind the Plenty course is the idea that there is enough to feed all of us on this planet. But the way in which we structure our society, the way in which we look after ourselves, gets in the way of that. So the first thing I think Jesus is trying to say, and see what you think, is that the man's behaviour is wrong because it withholds precious resources from other people who need them. The other challenge, the punchline at the end, is that Jesus points out, well, even if it is ours, it's only ours for a bit, because the man drops dead at the end of the parable, and Jesus calls him a fool, which is a bit brutal. But basically, yeah, you can't take it with you, I suppose, is what Jesus is saying there. The idea that we can control our own destiny with wealth is ultimately an illusion. But the third and final point comes in the second part of the passage. Seeing life as about accumulating wealth for yourself is actually not good for you. It's not good for our health. It's not good for our well-being. Jesus doesn't follow the parable up with the message, so don't be greedy. Rather, he says, so don't worry. He recognizes that most of us don't seek wealth because we are greedy, but because we're anxious about the future and whether we will have enough for ourselves and our families. And maybe we see that worry in the words of the rich man when he says to himself, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." Maybe relaxing is a new thing for this guy. If he's anything like a lot of us, maybe he spent his life anxiously working hard, worrying about whether his barns will keep everything safe, trying to protect himself and his family from an uncertain world. Well, the bad news, there was an article that came out in Forbes magazine recently that said basically that rich people worry as much about money as poor people. And later on, we're going to sing a song that has the line, "Spirits oppressed by pleasure, wealth, and care." The hoarding of wealth need not be the answer to our peace of mind. Our anxieties about having enough can control us too. And unchecked, those anxieties can lead us to buy and consume more than our fair share of the world's resources, which obviously has huge implications for everyone else. Because as we all know, the commercial world is full of messages that play on our anxiety, give us lots and lots of ideas of things to buy and consume and fill our barns with. These are some example messages from campaigns I didn't work on, I hasten to add. But there was one campaign that I saw. "Here is a cream aimed at the over 50s that will make you look 10 years younger. And that will make you more lovable." Because, by the way, nobody loves anyone over 50, apparently. Secondly, "This car will show the world how sporty, successful, and also understated you are. This shampoo will make your hair look, on average, 27% more radiant." Or one of my favourites, "Men are rubbish parents, but at least their smart wives can buy the right nappies for them." Men, eh? Or finally, "Your children will get ill unless you wipe over every possible surface of your house with this detergent, including behind the U-bend." Well, some of them are silly. Most of them are at least a little bit untrue, and some of them are arguably offensive. They all try and make us buy things that we don't really need. And the reason I left behind advertising for the church is that I think there are better songs to sing than those. There are better things to say to your soul than worrying about wealth and your personal barns. Some of you will know that when I was exploring whether to sort of do this whole church thing, M. Coley was the person at the diocese that led me through the process and helped me work out whether it was the right thing. So it's all her fault, if you're wondering. But she reminded me this week that at the time I wrote something for her about this business of what messages we spend our lives consuming. And I think it's still a little bit true. So I'm going to finish with these words that I wrote when I still worked in advertising. "Although consumerism thrives, there's a yearning for spiritual depth and an open-mindedness to new ways of seeing the world, especially among younger generations. There's a longing for realness, for voices to call out the lies told by media, that your body and your life are not good enough, that judge our children against airbrushed beauty ideals and tell the old, the ugly, and the different that they are lesser than. It's the Tinder dating culture that says people are disposable, the neoliberal culture that says the worst crime is to be a loser, the Facebook culture that encourages you to showcase your winner lifestyle. People want to know there are better songs to sing, ones about justice, hope, and redemption. Our churches need to live that out, welcoming, celebrating, and redeeming the messy and glorious reality of God's people. Communities focused on the figure of Christ, speaking truth to power and offering hope. So over the next 6 weeks, we're going to carry on considering these really difficult issues of climate change and justice. So I hope we can explore together on Sunday mornings and on Thursdays at 8, if you're interested in coming along, how we can sing those songs of justice and hope in new ways, bringing God's kingdom and loving our world and the people in it. Amen.